I didn't come here for money, but the guards looked at me like I was holding out a tin cup and wearing rags. They searched my bag before I could even step onto the marble porch, though all I had inside were tissues, my ID, and the photograph that changed everything. I stood tall, shoulders back, chin up, just like my adoptive mother taught me before every school play, every college interview, every heartbreak. The photograph showed two people beaming down at a newborn in a hospital bassinet, their expressions full of pride and fear, and something else I couldn't quite name. I'd found it in a box marked medical records after my mom died, buried under insurance paperwork and yellowed report cards. At first, I'd thought the people in the photo were hospital volunteers or nurses, but 2 years ago, I finally got my DNA results back. And they told a different story, one that pointed straight to the Harringtons. Billionaires, philanthropists, and the very couple from that old photograph. I was their daughter. If you have a similar story about betrayal from the people you least expect, tell us in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. My name is Naomi Reed, and I grew up believing I'd been left in a basket at the doorstep of St. Agnes Home for Children. It wasn't true, not exactly. The paperwork said private relinquishment, which sounded more like a business deal than an act of desperation. I'd always wondered where I came from, but it wasn't until my daughter Mia started asking questions that I decided to dig deeper. Mia, my miracle child, my storm. She's the reason I'm standing in front of these wrought iron gates today, wearing my only blazer and holding onto a truth I never asked for. She's the reason I've come to meet the people who tossed me aside like yesterday's news, assuming I'd never resurface. Mia didn't know I was coming here. She would have insisted on joining, and I needed to do this on my own. Or at least, that's what I thought when I boarded the bus from Phoenix to Aspen 3 days ago. The Harringtons weren't hard to find once I had their names. Every charity gala, every real estate deal, every photo op with celebrities or senators, they were always smiling, always perfect. But I knew perfection was often just another form of distance. The estate looked like it had been carved out of a dream and polished until it gleamed with cold indifference. A winding drive, flanked by hedges taller than me, led to the kind of mansion that made luxury magazines blush. Every brick probably cost more than my car, and the fountain out front sprayed water like it was auditioning for a movie about royalty. A man in a crisp black suit opened the door, not with welcome, but with wariness. "Name?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the patience of someone paid well to endure surprise visits. "Naomi Reed," I said. "I have an appointment." He checked a tablet, then raised one carefully plucked eyebrow. "You'll have 15 minutes. He led me through marble halls and hushed rooms full of antique furniture and no signs of life. Everything was curated, distant, like the owners had never let anything messy touch their world. They were waiting for me in a sunroom that looked like it had never felt an actual storm. I recognized them immediately, Edward and Clarissa Harrington, frozen in time like the magazine covers that lined their hallway. Clarissa looked more like a statue than a person, wrapped in cream silk and pearls that probably had a security escort of their own. Edward was thinner than I expected, with a posture that suggested both age and arrogance. "Miss Reed?" Clarissa said, not rising from her seat. "Please, sit." Her voice had the smooth chill of water straight from a glacier. I sat across from them, palms flat on my thighs, willing myself not to shake. "I assume you know why I'm here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Edward tilted his head slightly. "We received your documents. We have verified the claim. It wasn't acceptance. It was admission, begrudging and sterile." "You're our biological daughter," Clarissa said, and I swear she flinched on the word daughter. But that was a closed chapter. We had no intention of reopening it. I nodded slowly, swallowing a cocktail of grief and fury I'd been carrying for decades. "And yet here I am," I said, "because I had the right to know." Edward shifted in his seat, glancing at his wife before speaking. "Why now? After all this time? What are you hoping to gain?" The implication wasn't subtle. They thought I wanted money, access, maybe even a cut of their empire. "Nothing," I said, "except the truth." Clarissa's expression didn't change, but something in her jaw tightened. "You expect us to believe that?" she asked. "You tracked us down after 51 years and claim it's not about money?" "Believe what you want," I said, pulling out the photograph and sliding it across the table. That's me. That's you. Tell me it didn't mean anything." Clarissa stared at the photo, eyes scanning the edges like she might find a flaw that excused everything. Edward looked at it longer, his hands trembling slightly as he lifted it. "We were told it was for the best," he murmured. "That we were too young. That you would be better off." "Better off in the foster system?" I said, unable to keep the bite from my voice. "Better off, bounced from house to house until I was 7? Clarissa said nothing. Edward put the photo down carefully, like it might shatter. "You don't understand the pressure we were under," I laughed. "Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. You lived your whole lives in comfort while I fought for scraps," I said, voice rising. "Don't talk to me about pressure." Clarissa stood abruptly, her composure cracking just slightly. "We did what we had to do. We thought the records would stay sealed." "They didn't," I said. "And I'm not a secret anymore." Edward looked weary now, as if my presence had aged him. "What do you want from us?" he asked again. "A trust fund? An apology?" I stood slowly, meeting their eyes. "I wanted answers," I said. "I got them. I wanted to see you in person. Done. And now I want to leave before I start screaming." Clarissa moved to block the door. "We're not finished," she said coldly. "I think we are," I replied, stepping past her. But before I could reach the door, a voice rang out behind me. "Mom?" My heart dropped. I turned slowly to see Mia standing in the doorway, her bag slung over one shoulder and her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked like she'd run from the car to the mansion, cheeks flushed and curls wild around her face. "Mia, what are you?" I started, but she cut me off. "You thought I'd let you do this alone?" she said. "Not a chance." She turned to Edward and Clarissa. "So, these are the people?" Her voice was calm, but I could see the storm gathering behind her eyes. Edward's face paled as recognition dawned. "You're Mia Reed?" he asked. Clarissa stepped closer, her mask of indifference slipping. "Yes," Mia said, lifting her chin. "And judging by your faces, I don't need to explain who I am." Clarissa took a step back like she'd been physically struck by Mia's presence. Her eyes scanned Mia's face, as if looking for a flaw, a weakness, something to disprove what she clearly knew was true. Edward sank further into his chair, the hand holding the photograph trembling ever so slightly. "We've seen your films," he said, the words escaping him like air from a leak. "Didn't connect the last name." Mia crossed her arms, her posture loose but alert, like a dancer waiting for the music to start. "That's funny," she replied, "because my mom's name is right there, on every bio, and every press junket I've ever done." I stayed silent, trying to keep my balance in a room spinning with tension and unspoken judgments. Mia's gaze flicked toward me for a brief second, checking in, grounding herself. "So let me get this straight," she said, tone sharpening. "You threw my mother away and now want to pretend like she's the problem?" Edward opened his mouth, but Clarissa spoke first, her voice brittle. "We didn't throw her away. We made a difficult decision." Mia's laugh was low and humorless. "Let me guess. It was the times, it was the pressure, you were too young, blah, blah, blah." Her voice wasn't cruel, but it had steel in it, sharpened over years of interviews, critics, and people who underestimated her. "You thought you could erase her like she was a bad investment." Clarissa flinched, but didn't respond. Edward looked down at his shoes, and for a second I saw a man who might actually feel regret. "She deserved better," Mia continued, gesturing toward me. "And if you'd spent 5 minutes with her, you'd know that." I swallowed hard, heart pounding at the weight of being seen. "Mia," I began, but she shook her head slightly. "No, Mom," she said, voice gentler when she turned to me. "You don't have to defend them or make excuses. Not after what you've survived." Her words hit something raw inside me, something I didn't even realize had been aching. Clarissa stepped forward, clearly trying to recover control of the room. "This isn't a press conference, Miss Reed," she said. "This is a private matter." Mia's smile returned, but it wasn't warm. "That's where you're wrong," she replied. "You made it public the moment you let a child slip into the system and built your legacy on sanitized lies." Edward looked up slowly, something almost like fear creeping into his expression. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "Tell your story?" Mia shrugged like it wasn't even worth the drama. "I haven't decided yet," she said, casually inspecting her nails. "But it's not about revenge, if that's what you're worried about." She glanced at me again, and I knew she meant it. "I just want the truth, and respect for the woman who gave me everything without having anything herself." Clarissa's voice dropped to a near whisper. "We didn't know." "Not really. We were told the adoption would be final, confidential, and convenient," Mia added without looking at her. "Don't forget that part." I stayed still, unsure if I was watching a reckoning or a negotiation, and unsure which would hurt more. Edward shifted in his chair, the photograph still sitting between his fingers like an anchor he didn't know what to do with. "You've built a good life," he said to me. "Better than most." I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. "A good life doesn't erase what you did," I said, each word deliberate. "And it certainly doesn't give you credit for it." He nodded slowly, eyes cloudy, perhaps with age or maybe guilt, but I couldn't afford to care which. "You were never supposed to come back," Clarissa said, and this time her voice cracked. "We hoped. You were happy." "You didn't hope," I replied. "You just didn't want to know." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the distant sound of birds chirping outside the sunroom windows. Mia reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, slim and crisp, placing it gently on the table. "This is from my legal team," she said. "Not a lawsuit. Not yet. Just a formal notice of recognition." Clarissa's fingers twitched, but she didn't touch it. "You're legally obligated to acknowledge Naomi as your biological daughter," Mia continued. "We're not asking for money. Not today. But we're not going to be erased either." I looked at my daughter, all blooming behind my ribs like a fire I hadn't known was burning. She was everything I'd ever dreamed of being: brave, articulate, unafraid. Edward finally picked up the folder, flipping it open with hesitant hands. His eyes skimmed the first page before he stopped, frozen. "There's a clause here," he said, voice uncertain. "You're petitioning for access to the Harrington family trust?" Mia's lips tightened, and she nodded. "I'm not," she said. "My mother is." The silence cracked, splintered, then settled again. "Because unlike you, I don't leave family behind." Clarissa's jaw clenched as she reached for the folder, skimming through the pages like they were laced with poison. "You don't understand what this means," she said tightly. "That trust was set up decades ago, before DNA tests, before the truth could fight back." Mia interrupted. "Yeah, we get that." Edward stood slowly, as if the weight of the room had aged him 20 years in 2 minutes. "If this goes public," he began, "it will change everything. Our legacy, our name, the board." "You mean your brand," I said softly. "Don't worry, I don't want it." Mia's voice sharpened again. "But you will recognize her, and the world will know who she is, whether you cooperate or not." I looked between them, letting the silence breathe. "This isn't a threat," I said. "It's a beginning. You get to decide what kind." Clarissa's fingers curled tightly around the edge of the folder, white-knuckled and rigid, like she could crumple the truth if she just held on hard enough. Edward hadn't sat back down, but he looked like he might collapse if the weight of his name pressed any harder on his spine. "We need time," Clarissa said finally, her voice brittle, sharp, and hoarse in places where elegance used to live. "You had 51 years, I said quietly. "Time's never been the issue. Accountability has." Mia walked over to me, her arm brushing mine, her calm defiance filling the space between all of us. "The documents give you 30 days to respond," she added. "Not to write a check, not to open a trust, just to acknowledge the connection you tried to erase." Edward nodded slightly, his lips tight, his eyes glassy but still holding the stiffness of a man who never thought he'd be confronted like this. "And if we don't respond?" he asked. "Then we go public," Mia answered plainly. Clarissa looked at her husband, something flickering between them that was more fear than strategy. "You'll ruin us," she whispered, though the threat in her voice had dulled. "We built this empire, this reputation, on discretion." I watched her. watched the perfect lines of her posture unravel one tremor at a time. You built it on silence, I corrected. That's not the same thing. Mia stepped closer to the table and placed her hands on it gently. But this isn't about destruction. It's about truth, she said. About making things right while you still have the chance. Edward sank into the chair behind him like a man lowering himself into the past. We don't know how to fix this, he muttered. We don't even know where to start. My voice surprised even me with how steady it was. Start by saying my name. Naomi, Edward said after a long silence. Naomi. We're sorry. It didn't feel like forgiveness or even truth, but it felt like something breaking. Maybe denial, maybe history, maybe something brittle that had always been waiting to snap. Clarissa stayed quiet, and when she finally did speak, it wasn't to me. What is it you do, Mia? She asked. Her voice dipped in something unreadable. Acting, directing, producing? Mia raised an eyebrow but didn't miss a beat. All three, she said. I've worked on studio features, indie passion projects, and one very pointed documentary about systemic injustice in the foster care system. Clarissa blinked, and for a moment, the poise slipped. You've built a name for yourself, she said, as if testing the weight of the words. No thanks to the one you gave me, Mia said. I kept it out of pride, not out of respect. They looked like they'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes, their wealth doing nothing to shield them from consequences long overdue. Edward turned toward me, still holding the photo, though now it trembled slightly in his hands. I asked the agency to give you to a family that would care for you, he said. Not because we didn't want you, but because we thought you'd disappear into a better life. You didn't ask about follow-ups, didn't check on me, didn't make sure any of that happened, I replied. You just signed papers and moved on. Clarissa opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, like the words were too sharp to swallow. We were scared, she said finally, and I laughed, bitter, small, humorless. You were rich, I corrected. And scared people without power don't get to make that excuse. Mia placed a hand on my shoulder as I exhaled through clenched teeth. You weren't ready to be parents, I said. But I was still ready to be loved. The room felt colder now, like the sunlight had backed away from the windows in quiet retreat. Clarissa stepped away from the table, walking to a sideboard where a crystal decanter gleamed like temptation. She poured herself a drink with shaking hands, then offered one to Edward, who declined. We'll consider the terms, she said at last, her voice a shade quieter. Not for fear of exposure, but because maybe it's time. I nodded once. That's all we wanted today. Mia gathered the folder and tucked it back into her bag, her movements crisp and professional. You'll hear from our attorney in 2 weeks, she said. After that, the clock runs. Edward looked up at me one last time, then down again like the weight of my face was too much to bear. You look like my mother, he said quietly. She would have wanted to know you. I didn't respond because I didn't know what to do with that. Mia nodded toward the exit, and we turned toward the hallway without another word. As we passed the butler from earlier, his expression now unreadable, maybe even apologetic, he opened the door with more deference than before. The sunlight outside was too bright, too cheerful for what had just happened inside, but it made me squint and feel the warmth of something real. Mia slid her sunglasses on and fell into step beside me. You okay? She asked. Her voice softened with concern. I nodded slowly. I think I will be, I said. That was more than I ever expected. And exactly what you deserved, Mia said. They don't get to bury people anymore. My eyes stung, but I kept walking toward the car. The gravel crunched under our feet as we neared the lot where the rental sat waiting, its tan paint glinting like sand in the sun. I opened the door and slid into the passenger seat while Mia took the driver's side. She started the engine but didn't drive yet, her hands resting on the wheel, her eyes scanning my face. I didn't want to come at first, she admitted. I thought maybe I'd make things worse. I reached over and squeezed her hand gently. You made them real, I said. You reminded them that erasing me came with consequences. She smiled faintly. I just told the truth. I leaned my head back against the seat. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. We drove in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't demand anything but presence. Trees blurred past the windows as we wound down the mountain road, the mansion shrinking behind us like a bad dream losing its shape. Mia kept one hand on the wheel and the other near her phone, checking GPS now and then, though we both knew the way. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was reverent, thick with the weight of everything we didn't have to say out loud. I stared out the window, watching sunlight stutter through the trees, wondering how people could live in that much wealth and never feel full. They looked smaller when we left, I said finally, not turning to face her, like the truth shrank them. Mia nodded without looking away from the road. Because it did, she said. They've been hiding behind power for so long, they forgot how to stand up without it. And now? I asked, not even sure what I meant. Now they have to look at what they built and what they broke to build it, Mia replied. She turned off onto a quieter road, heading back toward the lodge we were staying at for the night. They thought they were the only ones who got to write the narrative, she continued. But we brought a red pen. I laughed, not bitter this time, but tired, relieved, and deeply grateful. You're too good at this, I told her. I learned from you, she said. You taught me how to stand tall, how to fight with dignity, how to ask hard questions and wait for real answers. I shook my head slightly, brushing away the emotion crowding my throat. I wanted to protect you from all of this, I admitted. But I think you were born to break it wide open. She reached across the console and gave my hand a squeeze. And in that moment, I felt taller than the mansion we'd left behind. By the time we reached the lodge, the sun had dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in soft oranges and dusky blues. The woman at the front desk gave us a polite smile as we passed, clearly recognizing Mia, but too professional to say anything. We took the stairs instead of the elevator, something we always did when we traveled, a small ritual that made the world feel less transient. Our room smelled faintly of cedar and clean linens, and the moment I stepped inside, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. Mia dropped her bag by the couch and opened the sliding door to the balcony, letting the crisp mountain air wash through the room. I followed her, wrapping my arms around myself as the coolness bit gently at my skin. You were incredible today, I said, watching her lean against the railing like she belonged on a magazine cover. So were you, she replied, her eyes on the darkening trees. You faced them. You didn't flinch. I felt like a scared teenager half the time, I confessed. But I wasn't alone. That's the difference, Mia said, turning to face me fully now. They had each other and still managed to build a lie. We had each other and built a life. Her words settled in my chest like warmth, like a hand pressed gently over an old scar. You know, she added, they were afraid of me the moment I walked in. I nodded. I saw it. It was like they were seeing the ghost of every decision they buried. And I wasn't even trying to be intimidating, she said with a half smile. That's what made it more powerful. I let the breeze push through my hair, closing my eyes for a moment. Do you think they'll sign the acknowledgement? I asked. Mia's answer came after a pause. I think they will. Not because they want to, but because now they have to. We slept with the window cracked open, the cold air tangled with pine and silence and peace. I woke in the early hours, the sky barely hinting at dawn, and watched Mia sleeping, the same way I had so many nights when she was a child. She slept like she existed in a world that would always hold her, arms loose, breathing even, never curled in defense the way I had slept most of my life. I used to stay up just to watch her chest rise and fall, whispering promises into the dark that she would never feel discarded, never feel invisible, never feel what I had felt. Seeing her now, an adult, powerful and unafraid, I realized something had healed in me along the way. I pulled the blanket higher over her and tiptoed to the balcony, watching as a faint line of light split the sky like a promise. The mountains glowed slowly, reluctant to let go of the dark. I thought about Edward and Clarissa, their cold faces, their aging hands, the silence they'd weaponized. Maybe they'd talk to their lawyers today. Maybe they wouldn't. But I'd said what I came to say, and I wasn't broken anymore. I had never been begging. I'd just been claiming what was already mine. By mid-morning, we were back on the road, driving toward the airport with the radio low and our spirits higher than they had been in weeks. Mia handled most of the conversation, switching between story ideas and thoughts about future interviews, occasionally pausing to check emails on her phone. I listened, chiming in when it felt right, but mostly I just watched her, marveling at the sheer force of her being. At a gas station just outside of Denver, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it, assuming it was another robocall or maybe a reminder from my dentist. But when I looked down, I froze. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize, and the preview line showed just 2 words. "We've decided." My breath caught, and I opened it. The full message was longer, signed by a law firm, but the key part was this: Mr. and Mrs. Harrington formally acknowledge Naomi Reed as their biological daughter. My knees went weak, and I grabbed the edge of the rental car for balance. Mia looked over from the other side of the pump, eyebrows lifting in concern. "You okay?" she asked. I handed her the phone wordlessly. She read the message, then looked up at me, her mouth opening in surprise. "They actually did it?" she said, voice hushed. I nodded, too stunned to speak. She reached for me, pulling me into a tight hug, her face buried in my shoulder. "That's huge, Mom," she whispered. "That's history-changing." I nodded again, tears slipping down my cheeks before I could stop them. "I didn't think it would matter this much," I admitted. "But it does," Mia pulled back, her eyes shining, "because it's not just about you. It's about every kid who's ever been told they don't matter. You're proof they do." The flight back to Phoenix felt lighter than the one that had brought me to Colorado, like gravity had finally released something I'd been carrying for a lifetime. Mia slept beside me with her head tipped toward the window, her sunglasses on even though the cabin was dim. I held the signed legal acknowledgement in my lap, not reading it anymore but still needing to feel the paper's weight. The letterhead was embossed, official, final, the truth-given form in black ink and expensive stationery. I didn't care about the money, the trust, or the influence it might grant me in their circles. I cared that somewhere, in a locked drawer or digital file, my name would no longer be redacted or buried. It wasn't everything, but it was something. After a lifetime of being unspoken, I was now recorded. I closed my eyes and imagined my adoptive parents' faces, how proud they would have been, how Mary would have framed the letter, how Frank would have told the gas station clerk about it like it was front-page news. I missed them so deeply in that moment I could barely breathe. Back home, the desert heat felt like an old friend pressing against my skin as we stepped out of the airport. Mia's assistant had left her car in long-term parking, freshly washed and filled with gas. The kind of detail Mia always noticed, but never commented on publicly. We drove with the windows down, desert wind blowing through our hair, the legal envelope tucked into my purse like a passport. Mia's phone buzzed every few minutes, but she didn't check it until we hit the freeway. "My publicist wants to run a soft piece," she said, scrolling through her messages. "Just a quiet article. No names unless we want them, but something that tells people this happened." I turned toward her, surprised. "Why would you want to do that?" She shrugged, keeping her eyes on the road. "Because we're not the only ones this has happened to, and sometimes a headline can be the match that lights a fire under justice." I didn't answer right away, but I nodded slowly. Over the next few days, life returned to a strange, quiet rhythm. I went back to my job at the Community Arts Center, where I ran children's theater programs. A job I loved, a job that grounded me. None of the parents or kids knew about the Harringtons, and I didn't feel any need to tell them. They knew me as Miss Naomi, the one who brought extra snacks and always clapped the loudest at rehearsals. I was still that person, no matter what lineage a document now claimed I had. Mia flew back to LA for a meeting with her production team, promising to return for dinner Sunday like always. She didn't say anything else about the article, and I didn't ask. I thought maybe the moment had passed, that the whole thing could just recede into memory like a completed chapter. But on Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was taping down a backdrop in the auditorium. The headline read, "Hollywood star's mother reunites with billionaire birth family after 50 years. She was never a secret to me." I stared at the screen for a full minute, not moving, not breathing, just absorbing the sentence over and over again. The article was tasteful. It didn't name the Harringtons, just referred to a well-known philanthropic family. It quoted Mia sparingly, focusing more on the human elements than the gossip. It told a story of resilience, of reconnection, of what happens when silence is broken by love. My name was in the article twice, and both times it made my chest feel full and fragile at the same time. Naomi Reed, community arts educator and mother of actress Mia Reed, has been identified as the biological daughter of a prominent American couple who gave her up for adoption in the 1970s. It didn't glorify them, didn't demonize them either. It simply told the truth. I forwarded the article to Mia with a single word: beautiful. Her reply came seconds later. It's just the beginning. I didn't know then how right she was. By Saturday morning, the center's phone line had rung 12 times before noon, all from journalists trying to confirm or deny the article's implications. I told the receptionist to redirect everything to voicemail and asked the board director for a brief leave of absence. He nodded, understanding more than I expected, and told me to take as long as I needed. I spent the rest of the day organizing old photographs, not because I had to, but because I needed to remember who I had been before DNA, and headlines changed everything. Pictures of Mia with missing front teeth, of our one-bedroom apartment with a leaky ceiling, of school plays where I'd stitched costumes from thrift store curtains. We had survived so much together, and now the world was beginning to look at us with new eyes. That night, while microwaving leftovers, I got a call from a number labeled Harrington Estate. I didn't answer right away, letting it ring until voicemail picked up, but curiosity gnawed at me, and eventually I pressed play. It was Edward's voice. Slower, raspier, as if aged even in the last few days. Naomi, he said, I read the article. Clarissa did too. I won't ask you to take it down. I know better. But I want you to know that for the first time in 50 years, we're talking about you like you exist. It's not much, but it's something. There was a pause, long and uneven. She framed the article. It's in the hallway by the study. I thought you'd want to know that. The message ended with a beep, and I just stood there, holding the phone like it was made of glass. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just whispered to myself, they see me now. For the first time, it was true. The next morning, Mia came straight from the airport and let herself into the house with the spare key. She found me sitting at the kitchen table, coffee cold, newspaper unopened, the letter still on the counter. You got the call, she said. I nodded. Frame the article, I replied. By the study. She exhaled and slid into the chair across from me. We changed the narrative, Mom. We didn't ask permission. We didn't grovel. We just said, here I am. Deal with it. I smiled faintly. We didn't burn the bridge, but we made sure they couldn't ignore the people standing on the other side of it anymore. Mia reached for my hand. That's legacy, Mom. And it's only part one. Mia stayed the rest of the day, curling up on the living room couch with her laptop, while I tried to remember how to act normal. We ordered Thai food from the place on 5th Street we both liked, the one that always gave us extra spring rolls for no reason. She answered a few texts from her agent and made me promise to call her if any reporters showed up at my front door. I assured her no one had yet, though I'd caught a black SUV driving slowly past twice that morning. Don't worry, she said, smiling without looking up from her screen. Let them take pictures. We're not the ones hiding. The confidence in her voice made me feel steadier somehow, like I'd climbed a rope she'd been holding all along. After dinner, we went through some of the family records Patricia, Mia's manager, had collected from the trust archives. Most of it was dry financial stuff, names of board members, annual summaries, donation spreadsheets. But then Mia opened a file labeled 1972, Personal Correspondence, Archived, and everything stopped. Inside was a scanned letter addressed from Edward to a man named Bernard Klein, an attorney based in San Francisco. It was dated March 3, 1972, 3 weeks before I was officially relinquished to the adoption agency. The letter was short but heavy, typed on thick stationery with Harrington Estate embossed at the top. Bernard, we cannot proceed with the formal acknowledgement. My father has made it clear the child cannot be retained without jeopardizing the inheritance structure he established in 1952. I leaned forward, heart pounding, reading the rest in silence. Clarissa is devastated. I am trying to keep things quiet. The agency will find a solution, but this must be handled cleanly." Mia didn't say anything, just looked at me with wide, unreadable eyes. "They were forced," I whispered. "Not just scared. Pressured. Disinherited if they kept me." Mia nodded slowly. "They still made the decision. But now we know the full shape of the pressure." I reached for the printout and held it like it might vanish if I blinked. All these years, I'd assumed cowardice, vanity, selfishness. And maybe those were part of it. But behind all of that had been the blade of consequence, wielded by someone more powerful than either of them. "His father," I said aloud. "Edward's father. He made the rules." Mia tapped something on her keyboard. "That would be Arthur Harrington," she said, pulling up an obituary from 1998. "Real estate tycoon, started the original fund, and apparently controlled it with an iron fist until the day he died." I nodded, reading the lines with her. "So they lost me to keep the empire intact," I murmured. "And now I'm part of that empire, whether they like it or not." Mia looked over at me. "Which means you get to decide what you do with it." That was the part that felt surreal. I wasn't just a name on a form anymore. I was a rightful heir with decision-making power. The next week passed in a blur of new meetings, legal paperwork, and quiet nights filled with long thoughts. I agreed to meet with Patricia and a small team she trusted to help manage any new responsibilities that came with my official recognition. I didn't want control of any board, didn't want a seat at a table I'd never been invited to. But I wanted to make sure the foundation Mia and I were dreaming up, one focused on youth in foster care, aging out of the system, was built right. I named it the Henderson Project, after my adoptive parents, Frank and Mary. Every document signed, every bank transfer filed, every structure registered under that name, felt like a tiny resurrection. They never got to live in a world that saw what they gave me, I told Mia one night, so I'll make one in their honor. Mia was already talking to production teams about filming a docuseries on post-adoption trauma and late reunifications. "It'll help normalize the conversation," she said. "This isn't just your story. It's thousands of others." By mid-April, the Harringtons released a public statement through their PR firm. Stiff, worded like it had been carved out of stone, but real. "We acknowledge the reestablishment of connection with our daughter, Naomi Reed, and support her philanthropic vision moving forward." It didn't contain an apology, but it did contain my name. And for the first time, the media outlets using their family tree had to include me in it. Mia and I were invited to a private charity event hosted by the Harrington Foundation at the Metropolitan Club in Manhattan. I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Wasn't sure if I could keep my composure standing next to the people who had erased me for 5 decades. But Mia squeezed my hand and said, "You don't have to perform, just show up. Existing is powerful enough." So I agreed. I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to her movie premiere 3 years ago, the one she said made me look like I ran the world. The ballroom was everything I imagined. Chandeliers, white linens, and guests who'd never known anything but comfort. When Edward saw us walk in, his expression flickered between apprehension and something softer. Clarissa stood near a set of French doors, her hair as polished as her pearls, her gaze trained on a woman giving a speech at the podium. We didn't interrupt anything. We simply found our seats at a reserved table near the back, our presence noted, but not announced. An older gentleman at our table turned and whispered, "Are you the daughter?" I nodded, unsurprised that whispers had spread before the wine was even poured. "They say you turned it all down," he said. "Turned down a board seat, a trust allocation. Most people wouldn't do that." I sipped my water before answering. "Most people haven't had to fight for their name before," I said. "It's not money I came for. It's meaning." He nodded slowly, as if understanding required effort. As dessert was served, some complicated thing with gold flakes and caramelized fruit, Clarissa approached our table. She was alone, moving with the grace of someone who had spent her entire life under scrutiny. "Naomi," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I stood, not out of politeness, but because my mother had taught me to meet people eye to eye. "Clarissa," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. There was a long silence between us, not uncomfortable but fragile. "You look like the kind of woman we used to pretend we knew," she said. "But we never did. Not really." "No," I replied, "but it's not too late to start." Clarissa's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue or retreat or apologize. But none of the words made it out. Instead, she just nodded, slow and uncertain, like someone learning a language from scratch. "We're not good at this," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the crowd. "We never had to be." I didn't rush to fill the silence, didn't rescue her from the discomfort she'd spent a lifetime avoiding. "It's not about being good at it," I said. "It's about trying anyway." She looked over at Mia, who was laughing softly with the director of a youth mentorship nonprofit 2 tables over. "She reminds me of your grandmother," Clarissa said suddenly. "My mother was terrifying and magnificent. People bent around her like heat." I nodded, because I'd already seen that power in Mia more times than I could count. "Mia bends the world," I said, "but she never breaks it." Clarissa smiled faintly, a real one this time, and it made her look less like a statue and more like a woman. "We kept a photo," she said. "You were 3 days old, and I couldn't sleep, so I sat in the nursery, holding you until morning." My chest tightened at the thought of it. A moment I had never remembered, but that still belonged to me. "Why didn't you ever send it?" I asked. Clarissa looked down, suddenly fascinated by the stitching on her clutch. "Because we weren't allowed to. Because I was ashamed. Because if I'd sent it, I would have had to admit we'd given away something irreplaceable." I breathed in slowly, steadying the storm in my ribs. "I'd like to see it sometime," I said. "If that's possible." She looked up again, and something in her eyes cracked open. "It's already packed in an envelope. I'll send it next week." After Clarissa left, I sat back down and picked at the plate in front of me, unsure how to process a moment that felt like both closure and beginning. Mia returned a few minutes later, sliding into her seat like she'd been watching everything from a distance. "How'd it go?" she asked. I let out a long breath. "Surprisingly, not terrible," I said. "There's a photo of me as a baby. She's sending it." Mia blinked slowly, the gravity of it sinking in. Wow. I didn't even know there was a photo." "Neither did I replied. "It feels like I'm getting back time I never knew I had." "You can't ever get back time," Mia said gently, "but sometimes you can rewrite the ending." I looked at her and realized she wasn't talking about me anymore. She was talking about both of us. The rest of the event passed in a blur of small talk, clinking glasses, and the delicate dance of people pretending not to gawk. Several guests approached Mia for photos, and one brave woman asked if I was her publicist, to which Mia responded, "Nope, that's my mother." It earned a double take, then a flustered apology, followed by a request for a selfie that we both politely declined. As we exited the ballroom, Edward appeared in the hallway, waiting with a paper envelope in his hands. "I thought I'd give you this now," he said, offering it out with both hands like a peace offering. "It's not the photo Clarissa mentioned. This is something else." I took it cautiously, feeling the slight weight of more paper inside. "What is it?" I asked. "Letters," he said. "Ones I wrote but never mailed." I looked at Mia, who gave me a small nod. "I don't know what I'll do with them yet," I said truthfully, "but I'm willing to read the first one." We returned to the hotel suite Mia had booked for the night, one with 2 rooms and a shared sitting area that overlooked Central Park. I sat on the couch with the envelope unopened in my lap, unsure whether I was ready to revisit a voice that had remained silent my entire life. Mia emerged from the other room in sweatpants and a hoodie, her face scrubbed clean of makeup and her hair piled into a bun. "You don't have to read it tonight," she said gently, curling up beside me. "There's no rush." I nodded, but my fingers were already opening the flap. The first page was yellowed slightly, dated 1981, and began with the words, "Naomi, I know you'll never read this." I blinked hard, then kept reading. The letter was clumsy, halting, written like someone trying to reach across a canyon without knowing if the other side existed. He wrote about the weather, about business struggles, about the names they almost gave me. Then he wrote, Every time I see a girl in a school uniform, I wonder if you're learning something that will change the world." By the end of the letter, I wasn't crying, but my hands were shaking. Mia leaned against me silently, reading over my shoulder. "He wanted to pretend you could hear him," she said. "Maybe that's something." I folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into the envelope, not ready for the rest. "I don't know if it makes up for anything," I said. "It probably doesn't," Mia replied. "But it makes something out of the silence." We stayed like that for a while, quiet, the buzz of Manhattan outside our window steady and distant. I thought about all the letters I'd written in my mind, to a mother I'd imagined, to a father I'd created out of nothing. And now here I was, holding letters from a father who had tried to speak, but didn't know how. Maybe healing wasn't a clean line. Maybe it was made of crumpled paper, tired hands, and doors you never thought would open. The following morning I left early and walked the city alone for a while, needing space between the past and the headlines. I passed bakeries and joggers and sleepy dog walkers wrapped in scarves and ambition. For the first time, I felt like I could move forward without the weight of proving something. I wasn't lost anymore. I wasn't unwanted. I was Naomi Reed, daughter, mother, teacher, survivor. I had grown a life from a crack in the foundation, and now that foundation was mine to reshape. As the sun rose above the skyline, turning glass towers into golden silhouettes, I smiled to myself. Not everything had been returned, but everything I needed had finally found its way home. If you're still listening to my story, please take a moment to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds for you, but it makes a big difference for me. Back in Phoenix, life resumed its familiar tempo, but everything underneath had shifted slightly. I returned to the Community Arts Center and found a bouquet of daisies on my desk, no note, but I had a suspicion they were from the board director. The kids greeted me like nothing had changed, except one little girl who whispered, "My mom said you were on TV." I smiled and said, "Just for a minute," then handed her a glue stick and helped her finish her paper sun. The classroom smelled like construction paper and washable paint, and it grounded me more than any press release ever could. Mia came by that evening, still in costume from a rehearsal read-through, and collapsed on the couch like she hadn't sat down in days. "Your article's trending again," she said, holding up her phone without much enthusiasm. "It's been picked up in Germany, Brazil, and half the parenting blogs in the U.S., I blinked. "What are parenting blogs doing with it?" "Apparently you're being called the blueprint for single motherhood done right," she replied, which is both hilarious and completely accurate. I laughed, shaking my head, still not used to being the subject of other people's narratives. "They're romanticizing it," I said, like it was noble, not just necessary. Mia sat up, pulling her legs underneath her. "It was noble," she said. "Just because it was also survival doesn't make it less meaningful." I thought about Frank teaching me how to ride a bike in the empty parking lot of the steel mill, about Mary working double shifts and still making sure my clothes were ironed for school. "They'd hate this," I said quietly. "The attention, the noise." Mia smiled. "Then we'll keep their names where it matters most. On the programs, the grants, the places that change kids' lives." I nodded. "The Henderson Project is going to be bigger than they ever imagined." "That's the goal," Mia said. "Big enough that no child ever feels like they fell through the cracks." The paperwork for the foundation moved quickly, thanks to Patricia and her team, who had apparently built nonprofits for celebrities with far less noble intentions. We secured office space near downtown Phoenix, close enough to the center that I could walk between them on my lunch breaks. I didn't want a corner office or an executive title. I asked for a quiet room with 2 desks, one for me and one for visiting social workers. Mia insisted on funding the startup costs herself, though I made her agree that once the inheritance portion came through, the foundation would operate independently. We hired 2 full-time staff within the first month, both women who had aged out of foster care and wanted to pay it forward. "You don't have to have money to make a difference," I said during our first meeting, "but now that we do, let's make it count." We planned scholarships, emergency grants, and mental health services for kids over 18, the age when support usually disappeared. At night, I would read more of Edward's letters, always alone, always slowly, like they were pages of a book I wasn't sure I wanted to finish. Some were tender, some were excuses. All of them were from a man who had lived 50 years behind a door marked regret. One afternoon, Clarissa called, her voice surprisingly calm. "We'd like to visit," she said. "Just to see what you're building." I hesitated, unsure whether I was ready to let them into my present after all that had passed. But something in her voice wasn't polished. It was small, like she'd practiced asking 100 times. "Okay," I said. "One visit, nothing formal." Mia came down that weekend, and we arranged for the visit to happen early Sunday morning, before any of the kids or families were scheduled. Edward and Clarissa arrived right on time, dressed down but unmistakably themselves, stepping into the center with expressions that didn't quite know how to fit. I walked them through the halls, past the bulletin boards filled with photos and hand-drawn thank you cards. "This is what your money didn't build," I said. "But what your absence inspired." Clarissa's eyes glistened, but she didn't wipe them. Edward stopped in front of a wall that displayed black and white portraits of former foster youth who'd gone on to graduate from college. He stared at it for a long time, then turned to me. "I never graduated," he said suddenly. "Dropped out to take over the company when my father got sick." I looked at him, startled by the honesty. "I didn't either," I replied. "I was supposed to walk, but my adoptive parents died in a car accident the day before the ceremony." He nodded slowly, something like understanding passing between us. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the first time those words had come from him directly. "Thank you," I said. "It still matters." We moved on without saying anything else. At the end of the tour, Clarissa placed an envelope on my desk. "This is a personal donation," she said. "Not from the trust. From me." I didn't open it right away, just nodded and slid it into the drawer. "Why now?" I asked. She hesitated, then answered plainly. "Because I've seen what you're doing, and I want to be part of it, even if it's late." I didn't say yes or no. I didn't hug her or cry or promise anything. I just said, "Thank you," and watched her eyes shift with something like relief. They left soon after, quieter than they'd arrived. Mia waited until the car pulled away before asking how did it feel. "Like a door finally opened," I said. "One I stopped knocking on years ago." That night, I opened Clarissa's envelope and found a check for $200,000 made out to the Henderson Project. Tucked beneath it was a photo. Not the baby photo I expected, but one of her holding a newborn in a rocking chair, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair messy, her expression raw. On the back, in elegant script, she'd written, "You were loved. We just didn't know how to keep you." My throat tightened, and I sat there for a long time, holding the photo like it was a piece of something I'd never had permission to touch. I didn't feel forgiveness exactly, but I felt something close to grace. The kind that slips in sideways, quietly, when you stop expecting it. Upstairs, Mia was on the phone with her team, probably arranging flights or budgets or her next press junket. I looked at the photo again and whispered, "Thank you for trying." And for the first time in my life, I believed someone had. 2 months later, the Henderson Project held its first official gala, a modest but deeply meaningful event hosted at the same community arts center where my journey had quietly bloomed. We transformed the rehearsal hall into a reception space with string lights, paper lanterns, and student art lining the walls. Not fancy, but warm in the way true beginnings often are. Mia wore a deep green jumpsuit and acted as MC for the evening, her voice steady as she introduced speakers who had aged out of foster care and were now in college, trades, or mentorship roles. I stayed off stage most of the night, choosing to greet guests, refill trays, and guide donors to their seats like it was just another community potluck. Near the end, Patricia approached me with a smile, handing over the first printout of our donor impact report. 73 families supported so far, with another 42 applications pending. "It's already working," she said. "You've already changed lives." I held the paper and stared at the numbers, stunned by how tangible it had all become. Across the room, Clarissa and Edward stood near the refreshments, talking quietly with 2 social workers from the Downtown Foster Alliance. "They blend better than I expected," I said. "Privilege doesn't disappear, but it can adapt," Patricia replied. especially when it's given a second chance. Later that evening, when most guests had trickled out and the volunteers were packing up folding chairs, Clarissa approached me again, this time not with a donation or an envelope, but with a question. "Would you ever consider coming back with us?" she asked, voice gentle, uncertain. "Not to live, I mean, just for a weekend, to see where it all started." I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to walk those halls again, unsure if the mansion would feel like a trap or a monument. "What's there that I didn't already see?" I asked. She reached into her clutch and pulled out another photo. This one of a nursery dated 1972, with pastel wallpaper and a crib that looked too perfect to be real. "The room we made for you," she said. "We kept it for 2 years after you were gone. We only repainted when James was born." I stared at the photo, at the way the light slanted across the rocking chair in the corner. "Okay," I said after a moment. "I'll come." But Mia comes too. We flew to Aspen 3 weeks later, arriving on a quiet Friday afternoon when the hills were still green and the sky looked like it had just been scrubbed clean. Thomas, the same butler who'd first let me in, greeted us at the door with a warmer smile than before. "Welcome back, Ms. Reed," he said. "Miss Mia?" "It's just Naomi," I told him, and he nodded. Clarissa and Edward met us in the foyer, looking older than I remembered, but also softer somehow, like time had finally wrung the fight out of their pride. They didn't offer a tour this time. Just tea, soft conversation, and a quiet walk to the nursery down the east wing. The room was no longer a nursery, of course. It had been turned into a sitting room decades ago, but Clarissa handed me a small box that had been left untouched all these years. Inside were keepsakes, a rattle, a silver nameplate that just read "Baby Girl," and a knitted blanket so soft it nearly unraveled in my hands. "Mary knitted one just like this," I whispered, and Clarissa's eyes brimmed again. "Maybe that's how love works," she said. "It finds a way to duplicate itself." That night we stayed at a nearby inn instead of the estate. My choice, not out of bitterness, but boundaries. Over a quiet dinner, Mia pulled out her laptop and showed me the early drafts of the documentary project. The first episode featured my story, but it expanded into others. Stories of people adopted across racial, economic, and legal lines who'd fought to reclaim their histories. "It's not about pain," she explained. "It's about persistence. The audacity to trace your roots, even when everyone tells you they were cut." I watched the footage of myself on screen, nervous, quiet, older than I felt, and felt a strange tenderness for the woman I used to be. "You've made me into a symbol," I said. "No," she replied. "You made yourself one. I'm just holding up the mirror." We went to bed early, our rooms side by side, and I fell asleep, holding the old rattle from the box like it was a compass. The next morning, Clarissa met us at the estate gate, alone this time, wearing jeans and a cardigan instead of her usual armor of elegance. "I was wondering if we could talk privately," she said to me, and Mia nodded, stepping back toward the rose garden with her phone. We walked slowly down a gravel path lined with birch trees, past a pond where ducks floated like punctuation marks in still water. "I want to ask something," she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "And I understand if your answer is no." I waited, listening to the crunch of gravel beneath our feet. "Would you ever consider allowing us to be part of Mia's life? Not publicly, not for show, just as grandparents." I stopped walking, letting the wind pass through us. "She's 38, I said softly. "She's not a child you can coo at or spoil with gifts." Clarissa nodded, her voice breaking. "I know, but I missed being her grandmother for every birthday, every achievement, every heartbreak. I'd like to at least try to show up now." We sat on a bench near the pond, the air crisp, the quiet filled only with the occasional bird call. "You weren't ready to be my mother," I said, not cruelly, just plainly. "What makes you think you're ready to be her grandmother?" "Because I've watched her carry what I never could," she said. "And I want her to know she wasn't just born from love. She was born from strength that skipped a generation." I looked down at my hands, then at the wedding band I still wore for Frank, even all these years later. "She already has a grandmother," I said. "Mary raised her in every way that counts. But maybe there's room for more than one kind of legacy." Clarissa nodded slowly, blinking away tears. "I'd like to meet her properly then," she said. "When she's ready." "She's ready," I replied. "But she'll want to ask her own questions, and you'll have to answer all of them." When we returned to the garden, Mia was waiting with her sunglasses perched on her head and her arms crossed. Not closed off, just observant. Clarissa approached her and extended a hand. "I'm Clarissa," she said. "I know that," Mia replied, "and I know what you didn't do. But I also know what my mom forgave. So you'll get one chance. Don't waste it." Clarissa didn't flinch, just nodded. "Understood." I stood beside them, watching 2 generations of women navigate something bigger than history. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was something rarer, the first breath of possibility. And that was more than I'd ever thought I'd see in this lifetime. 3 weeks later, Clarissa and Edward flew to LA for a quiet dinner at Mia's house. Not an event, not a reunion, just 4 people at a table trying to remember how to share air. Mia cooked, insisting on doing it herself, despite 3 assistants offering to bring in catering. "If we're going to do this," she'd said, "we're going to do it real." The dining room smelled like garlic, rosemary, and something deeper. Maybe resolve, maybe the beginning of trust. Clarissa brought a bottle of wine older than me and didn't comment when Mia opened sparkling water instead. Edward came in holding a bouquet of white camellias, which he handed to me without a word. I took them, placed them in a vase, and didn't say thank you. Not out of rudeness, but because some gestures aren't meant to be repaid. We sat at the table and ate slowly, conversation cautious, but not brittle. Clarissa asked about the documentary project, and Mia spoke easily, explaining the grant applications and international interest. Edward asked about the Henderson project, and I surprised myself by speaking with confidence about donor strategy and long-term partnerships. We were no longer people trying to be family. We were people trying to be decent. After dessert, a peach cobbler Mia had made using Mary's old recipe card. The table grew quiet in the way only safe spaces do. "Frank would have liked this," I said, setting my fork down. "He always said the best rooms were the ones with more laughter than money." Edward smiled faintly. "He sounds like someone I would have respected," he said. "He was," I replied, "even when he didn't have 2 nickels to rub together." Mia pushed her plate back and leaned her elbows on the table. "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if none of it had happened?" she asked, her tone curious, not accusatory. "If you'd kept my mom, if she'd grown up here." Clarissa looked at me first, then at Mia. "Every single day," she said, "but thinking about it doesn't change it. Showing up now is the only thing that might." Mia nodded once. "Then keep showing up." That night, after they left, I sat alone on Mia's balcony, watching the lights of the city blink like distant stars. She joined me after a while, barefoot and wrapped in a blanket, her face bare of makeup and soft with thought. "You know what the weirdest part is?" she asked. "I don't hate them." I turned toward her, surprised. "I thought I would," she continued, "but I don't. They're complicated, they're guilty, but they're not empty." I nodded slowly. "Hate takes energy," I said. "You've got better things to build." She looked out at the skyline. "So do you, Mom." I smiled, feeling the weight of everything behind us folding into the night. The Henderson project expanded rapidly, opening satellite partnerships in 5 cities within the first year. We launched emergency housing for teens who'd been aged out, scholarship funds for trade schools, and therapy services focused on identity reconstruction. Mia's documentary series debuted on a major streaming platform to critical acclaim, and I was featured in episode 1, voice steady, hair brushed back, eyes honest. I didn't watch it the night it premiered, but Patricia sent me a message afterward that said simply, "You just helped 10,000 people feel less alone." The Harrington name started to appear, quietly, on anonymous donor lists and foundation endowments, never with fanfare, always behind the curtain. I didn't ask for more than that. Rewriting history wasn't my goal. Building the future was. At the next board meeting, we voted unanimously to fund a new initiative, transitional mentorship for birth parents seeking reconnection. "We can't fix the past," I said. But we can make sure the next Naomi doesn't have to wait 50 years to hear her name spoken with love. On my 69th birthday, Mia threw a small dinner at our favorite restaurant. Just 12 people, all from different parts of my life, none of them connected by blood. Patricia came, along with 2 of our scholarship recipients, one of whom brought her baby, and let me hold him the entire dessert course. Near the end, the waiter brought out a cake shaped like an open book, and the words "still writing" were written in script across the frosting. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my wine glass. Mia stood, lifted her glass, and gave a short toast. "To my mother," she said, "who taught me that identity isn't biology. It's bravery." I blinked quickly, refusing to cry in front of the table. "To the family you build when the world forgets to give you one," she added. Everyone clinked glasses, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of love arriving late, but still arriving. Clarissa called the next morning just to say happy birthday. "I sent something," she said. "It's in the mail. I hope it's not too much." I told her I didn't need anything, but she insisted. 2 days later, a small box arrived with no return address. Inside was the baby photo she'd promised months ago. Me, wrapped in a yellow blanket, eyes barely open, mouth curled like I was about to say something bold. Tucked behind the photo was a note in Clarissa's handwriting. "You were never invisible. I was just afraid to look." I held the photo for a long time, tracing the edges, wondering what that baby would have said if she could have spoken then. I think she would have said, "Watch me." And now, after everything, the world finally had. Sometimes people asked if I forgave them, and I never gave a simple answer. Forgiveness to me wasn't about absolution. It was about evolution. It was a choice not to let old pain define new days. Clarissa and Edward would never be the parents I needed, but they were learning to be the people I could know, and that mattered, even if it came decades late. Mia and I had already rewritten the story, not with erasure, but with expansion. There was room now for mistakes, for growth, for grace. And maybe that's what family really was. Not perfection, but presence. The last letter I ever received from Edward arrived on the first anniversary of my official acknowledgement. It wasn't long, just a folded page, typed like all the others, signed in blue ink. "Naomi," it began, "I no longer think of you as the child we lost. I think of you as the woman who found us. Thank you for walking through a door we kept locked and for not slamming it shut behind you. You changed our story. I hope we're doing the same for you. Love, Dad." I held the letter to my chest, eyes closed, breathing in the finality of it. I didn't cry. I didn't need to, because I had everything I came for. Not money, not retribution, but something far more valuable. My name spoken with love. My daughter, fierce and unshakable. And a legacy made of truth. Thank you for listening to my story. Before you leave, there's another story similar to the one you just watched. You'll see it on the top left of your screen.